And fellas, happy 4th of July weekend. I got a subject that I've been looking forward to sharing with you guys, what to look for when you're purchasing a used motocross or street bike. And I figured what better bike to start with than one of my favorites, the CR500. When you're buying a vintage bike like this, you got to understand that some of the components like the frame rails, the engine cases may not be available from the manufacturer. So look at the core of the bike. Is it a good core bike to restore or ride? Decide what you want to do with it. If it's just a rider, maybe you can look past some dents in the frame. But I always start with the frame on a motorcycle. That's the foundation, just like the foundation of your house. So I'll look at the frame rails at the bottom here. This has got a couple of dings and dents in them. Not that big of a deal. A qualified welder could fill those in and grind those down. There's no cracks or rust holes. I've seen the CRs where the bottom of the frame, there's a weep hole that'll actually rust out. So the bottom of this frame looks pretty good. Then you want to look at the subframe. Stand at the back of the bike. Look at the rear fender. Is the rear fender lined up with the rear wheel? Because these are notorious for being flipped over. Is the subframe straight? The subframe straight on this bike. Is the swing arm in good condition? Are there giant gouges on the bottom of it, which is pretty common? This one's about average. There's a few nicks in it. It's not that bad. And then, if you can, ride the motorcycle. Riding a bike will tell you so much about the condition of it. Start it up and listen. And so start the bike up and listen. Your ears are your friend when it comes to a vintage motorcycle engine. Is there any rapping noises like a bad crank? Is the piston making some funny noises? Pull in the clutch and put it into gear. And does it go into gear smoothly? And then ride it. Go through the gears. Make sure all the gears work. Get into like 4th gear on a hard surface like tar, and really get on the gas. And is the clutch going to slip? That's when you'll know. You may not be able to tell on dirt. So if you can ride it up the street, put it in 4th gear and crack the throttle. Make sure that the transmission, all 5 gears work. Guys, I just bought a Peak CR500 from the West Coast. I paid $10,000 for it and $1,000 to ship it here. That was restored, and the transmission was completely blown. And we didn't get to test ride it. And you can't buy transmissions for these anymore. Yeah, so what I had to do, I had to buy a whole nother motor. The average price on a CR500 motor is $3 to $5 grand, and then pull the tranny out of it. So what appears to be a good deal and restored, unless you get a chance to ride it or you're buying it from a reputable shop, ride the bike. Make sure all 5 gears. And they tell you it's just a clutch issue. Well, buyer beware. Make sure, if the clutch is slipping, you could have, and if you let the clutch out and it starts jerking, that usually means that the clutch basket is notched. You want to make sure the clutch basket is not notched. You can buy a clutch pack for like $60, so a new clutch is no big deal. But transmissions on these means that engine's got to come out and you got to split the cases. So if you're not that familiar with how to do that, which you're probably not, or you wouldn't be watching this video, make sure the tranny is good. I've never seen a transmission go bad on a CR500. They're pretty much indestructible, but when it comes to the Kawasaki KX500s, these are notorious for having transmission issues or something like a Kajiba that you have trouble getting parts for. Make sure the engine is good, and also the electronics on the bike. If it revs out nicely, revs out nice and clean. If it's burbling, they might tell you it's the jetting. Well, it might also be the ignition is messed up. Ignition parts can be expensive. So make sure that you've got good compression when it kicks over. If you can bring a compression tester, definitely test the engine compression. If you're buying it from someone that will allow you to bring it to a shop like ours to spend an hour of labor to have a professional go over it and confirm the engine compression is good, the clutch and transmission is good, that's going to be money well spent. Here's a telltale sign. If you can't do that, at least bring a 12 millimeter, bring a tool set, pull the seat off and take a look at the air box. If the air box has mice holes in the filter and it's dirty, or even if it has a clean filter, take the filter off and take your finger and rub it on the bottom of the air boot as it goes into the carburetor. And is there any sand in there? If there's sand in there, well, that means your motor has been ingesting sand, so you're probably going to need to do at the bare minimum a top end. Also, now their 2-strokes are supposed to smoke. Is it smoking excessively? If it's smoking excessively, then you may have a crank seal problem on the gearbox side where we've listen, just in the past few weeks, a few bikes that we weren't able to test, like that Peak 500, that's a $3,000 minimum setback, right? You may not want to. That to us is not the end of the earth. We're a bike shop. We'll write it off. But if you've been saving your pennies to buy a bike, it could be a deal killer for you. So make sure the clutch is good. Make sure the transmission is good. If it's smoking excessively, check inside here. Make sure this. Like, see how dry my finger is. If there's a bunch of oil coming out of there, pretty safe bet you got a crank seal bad on this side. And then do your research. Find out, can you change the crank seal without splitting the cases? Sometimes you can change the crank seal from the side in about a couple hours, which you can do on these. Some bikes you can't. And if it won't idle down when you crack the throttle and the bike, the idle is hanging, there's a damn good chance you got a crank seal problem on the ignition side and it's sucking air through here. So you can also take this cover off and grab the side of the motor and pull it upside down to see if there's any play in it. While you're over here making sure there's no excessive play in your crank bearings, take a look. Is the chain guide intact? A lot of old dirt bikes, people don't adjust their chain properly. This one's adjusted perfectly. Check the chain tension. You should have 3 fingers right here where the bolt is. That's perfect. Check your sprockets. Are they rounded off? These are great sprockets. This is a nice chain. Plan on spending about 150 to 200 bucks on a quality chain and sprocket set in an afternoon changing them. Does it have a case protector? But more importantly, even if there is a case protector, is there any evidence of JB weld up here? Did a chain come off and put a hole through your engine case? Quite common on an older bike. If you got a hole in your engine case, most people don't repair it properly. They just put JB weld on it and sell it to somebody else. So buyer beware. Check out your foot pegs. These are original 1986 CR500 foot pegs. You can see they're not sagging down. They're nice and straight. What that means is that the guy who rode this thing wasn't a pro motocross jumping it, because if you jump a lot, you'll actually bend the pegs down. These pegs are in good shape. The wheels are actually straight on this. This is an original set of wheels. They've been repainted, kind of like a half-ass gold paint job on top of the original anodizing, because the anodizing was fading. But check the rims and check the tires. Tires, not a big deal. You can put a set of tires on a 500. You can buy Dunlops for a set of Dunlops for 100 bucks. A set of Hoosier tires is going to set you back about 200. Tires and tubes, figure 100 to $250 depending on what tires you buy. 100 to 225. Tires and tubes and rim strips. Another thing you want to do is we got a wrench around here. Got a metal wrench?
Yeah.
Grab a wrench and tap on the spokes like this. Hear that? That spoke's out of adjustment. You want to hear that's a good one. Go like this, tap on the spokes, and if they don't, we haven't serviced this yet. This is going to be restored. This is just the way we got it. I would say this isn't that bad, but they're a little bit out of adjustment. And check and make sure all the spokes are there. It's very time consuming respoking a wheel, relacing a wheel. Check, make sure your sprocket's good, your chain is good, and then grab it by the rear wheel and shake it back and forth. Why are you doing that? Well, just by doing this right here, you can tell if your wheel bearings have play in them. You can tell if your swing arm bearings have play in them. Then also bring a stand like this KX500's on a stand and grab it by the rear wheel and pull the wheel up and down. See, that's got a little bit more play than I like in the shock linkage. It probably needs, well, the shock needs to be rebuilt on this, so I'm sure it does. There should be no play vertically and no play horizontally. Now, that's not a deal killer. You can buy a kit to redo your bushings for under 100 bucks, but it's a lot of time. All these things, take a notepad with you and write all your notes down. And you don't have to buy it right on the spot. You can take a day and think about it and get all your facts in line. If it needs plastics and graphics and a seat cover, price it out. Price out plastics, graphics, seat cover. Check the handlebars. Are the handlebars perfectly straight? Like this brand new set of Pro Tapers that we just put on this one. Set of bars is going to set you back $100 go. Are the levers straight? Is the clutch perch good? Check and see if the clutch cable is frayed at all. Are the cables in good condition? Is the throttle cable, you don't want to stuck cable on a 500, believe me. Is the throttle housing, see this one right here? It's, it actually, it returns properly. Sometimes they'll be stuck or there'll be sand inside of them. Check your front brake. Make sure that when you pull the front brake in on a disc brake bike that it stays nice and firm like this one, so that you know that your master cylinder is not blown up. Also, when the bike's up on the stand, grab it by we've just checked all the bearings in the ass end. Now we're gonna check the front end bearings. Grab the bike, tilt it back and go like this. This has got massive play in the front end. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. That's borderline, well, it certainly needs to be redone. So Now, to redo your front end bearings on this bike, you got to pull. Somebody redid this bike and powder coated the frame and just slapped it back together with all the original shit. It could be out of adjustment, but I'm 95% sure it's going to need new bearings. There's a bearing rate. It's not a big deal, but it's a $100 bill and an afternoon of your time, right? The bearing on the bottom and the bearing on the top, you take the old ones out, you clean it, you repack them with grease and put the new bearings in, put it back on and adjust it so there's a slight bit of tension back and forth so that it'll keep the bike from going into a speed wobble or a tank slapper. So check your front end bearings like I just told you, and check your fork oil. Make sure your fork oil is not leaking down the back. Just rub your finger on the back of the forks, because if your fork seals are leaking, it's going to leak down the back here and contaminate your brakes. Now you've got a situation where you got to redo your brake pads and your fork seals. Again, probably a 3-hour job and $50 in parts. Make sure your fork seals are good. When the bike is up on the stand, wheel sets are expensive. You're going to spend, you can spend $1,500 on a quality set of wheels, hubs, and spokes. The cheap Chinese ones that you can get online, maybe 700, 500, 700. But grab your wheel and go like this. And then stand back, come over here and look at it. And what you can do is you can go like this. Grab, watch this. See that? This wheel is actually totally usable and fairly straight. Has a little lump in it, but not bad for an old bike. Check your front wheel, make sure it's straight. Check your rear wheel and make sure it's straight. Like this. There's a little bit of friction here on this. This isn't spinning well. I'm guessing the rear brake is probably locked up. Probably needs to be rebuilt. You want to check, make sure your wheels are nice and straight on the bike. And again, back to the test ride. When you test ride the bike, pretty much everything I explained to you, if you're an expert level rider like me, I can just ride a bike, hit the front brake, and I'll feel that front end pulling in. It'll make a clunking noise, and I'll know immediately. And when you run the bike, you'll also be able to tell if it vibrates excessively. One or two things: either nuts and bolts are loose. 500s will vibrate more than most bikes because just the nature of the beast, the size of the motor. Your motor mount bolts, if those are loose, that'll cause vibration. But also, if your crank bearings are worn out because it sucks sand, it'll also vibrate excessively. So these are all things you want to look at. Ask the owner for documentation. Do you have any receipts for any of the work that was done on the motor? And check the dates on them. If it was done 5 years ago, and it's got 50 hours on it, it's not as valuable as if it was just done. Key things: check the air filter, check the transmission, ride the bike, check out the overall condition of the motorcycle, and ask yourself, do I want to buy a $2,000 Craigslist turd from Shady Cat, or do you want to buy one that's already done, fully restored, with no excuses? And like my dad used to say, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's evident when a bike is restored, like the ones you see that we do, that we've taken down to the frame and redone them. As far as the time, plan on it taking you twice as long as it's going to take us with a shop full of ATEX and all the tools at our disposal, 3 of everything. And guys working together. We can do a frame off on a bike realistically somewhere between 70 and 150 hours, depending on how detailed we're getting with are we doing some of the painting in house, or are we outsourcing powder coating, that kind of thing. So and ask yourself, do you have 100 hours to take a bike down into the frame and rebuild the crank and do all the bearings? And if the answer is yes, and you want to do it nights and weekends, it's a kick-ass hobby. There's nothing I'd rather be doing than this. This is basically a hobby that turned into an avocation. Liquid cool bikes. Check the radiators out. The radiators are kind of expensive, and this one on this side is a replacement aluminum radiator. You can see that's not the original radiator. The original one got smashed. Check the grates on the front. Does it look like they were smashed with rocks? These look mint, like brand new. So the original one was probably smashed with rocks. Also look for flat spots on the rim. See this right here? You see? Can you see that from where you are? There's a little flat spot on the rim. You're not really picking it up on the video, but I can tell looking at it from here that hit a rock at high speed. The other thing you can do is check the date code on the tire. all street bike tires, all motorcycle tires. I don't care if the tire looks brand new like this. I want to know how old is it? Is it 20 years old and hard as a rock and starting to get checking or cracking in it? Check the date code. This one right here, I just checked it. This is a brand new Pirelli Scorpion, but it was made the 43rd week of 2018. And I kind of need my flashlight to show you where it is, but here it is right here. I don't know if you can zoom in. It's a small 4-digit number. It says 4318. That's a 43rd week of 2018. These tires are almost 3 years old. It's a Pirelli. It's a unique size of a Pirelli. The rubber is still nice and soft, so it's not too old. But if you if you buy something like a Pirelli that's not as popular in size as a Dunlop, like checking out this brand new Dunlop we just put on this bike right here. This one has a 52 of 2000. Was it 52? We just checked it before we started filming. Honey and I checked it. 2020, 43 of 20. So this is a 2020 tire, less than a year old. I like fresh tires on my race bikes. You should always check the date code on your tires when you're buying them. On a motocross bike, check the expansion chamber out. This is a $250 part right here. Are there any, feel the bottom of it, the areas you can't see, run your fingers over it. There's not a single ding on the bottom of this pipe, but if you look at the side, there's a big dent. And trust me, we have a dyno here. I've dyno tested bikes with dented pipes. You can lose, this isn't dented, this is a small ding, but when you get it all dented up, I've seen as much as 4 horsepower or less on a dyno. With dents, it takes away from the performance of the power. It's like trying for the bike breathing through a sock. This can be taken out. We have a kit here, a dent removal kit. Ronnie knows how to do it. Basically, you plug both ends and you heat up the pipe and you pressurize it to about, what is it, 120 PSI?
I'm going to say about 80.
80. And then it pops the dent out and then you polish a pipe, which we'll do. Vintage bikes from the 80s and 90s. The water pumps, if the antifreeze was not changed on the bike regularly, I can guarantee you're going to have problems with the magnesium inside here. You can see this was replaced. This is an entire replaced water pump assembly and clutch cover and water pump. And that gets expensive, man. And it's time consuming. You can drop north of $400, $500 on a water pump. So make sure the water pump, the antifreeze is good and you don't have an issue with magnesium engine cases rotting out, because these are getting really difficult to find. More common on the 125s and 250s for some reason, I think. I'm not sure why. I've seen less of them rotted out in the 500s. So yeah, there's a lot to think about buying a bike. Hopefully these tips and tricks that I've told you that I've used and developed over the years to make sure I'm not getting screwed when I buy a bike. And even then, when I do, sometimes the shit hits the fan and you end up with a bad transmission or a bad ignition or something like that. Check your levers. Make sure your levers are nice and straight. Not a big deal. Levers and grips you can buy. Those small potatoes. Don't worry about levers, grips, bars, plastics. That can all be done, and it's not absolutely necessary as long as it's functional. Guys, when you pull this cover off and you grab your stator and wiggle it up and down, while you're in there, I've seen bikes that look brand new underneath there, 30 years old, and nothing's rusty. And I've seen 10-year-old bikes that were stored or ridden in wet areas that was a rusty disaster underneath there, and you're gonna have electrical problems, and that's expensive. A PVL ignition, if you have to buy one, you're gonna spend $500 on an ignition. Make sure the ignition components are clean underneath here. Check your intake boots for your reed valve. Make sure the boot is not cracked. Make sure that the junction to the air box is proper. This is a new Electron carb with a new intake. This is beautiful. This is $500 right here between the air filter, the carburetor, and the Boyson rad valve. That's a nice upgrade to have on this thing. It's got a beautiful pipe, so this is a good core bike. This also has a compression release on the head, which is going to save your Kickstarter and your engine cases. Check the engine cases if it's a 500 and the 3 notorious areas that they're known for cracking. 1 right here when the chain comes off. 2, check the bottom of the motor. Is there any evidence of any welding that was done on the bottom of this motor? Because if the crank seizes or blows up or it ingests a piston, usually it comes out through the bottom right here. Then check the other side of the engine and make sure that there's no cracks around right here. This is where either this cover will crack or the engine case will crack right here. AJ Wagoner, a Service Honda, has gone through the trouble of, he's an engineer, he reverse engineered these cases and made a new improved all billet polished aluminum aircraft quality engine cases that was reinforced in these 3 key areas. So if you need an engine case, highly recommend calling AJ, getting an upgraded engine case, and you can buy the engine cases in the crank a billet aluminum crank with a Wasner rod, the whole set for $2,300. So if you have you're fortunate enough to take the bolt off to drain the oil right here, check and make sure it hasn't been Healy coiled. A lot of bozos would over tighten them and screw those up. Make sure that's not Healy coiled. Check out the general condition of your hardware. Like this is a hardware store bolt right here, and these are not the original bolts right here. We are going to change all the hardware on this bike with new reproduction Honda hardware. Check your baffle, make sure it's not all dented, make sure the packing is intact. You'll also be able to hear if the packing is blown out of your muffler. It's going to sound loud and raspy and generally horribly. So this might have taken 20 minutes to explain it, but in 2 minutes, basically grab the ass end, wiggle it back and forth, pick the wheel up and down, check the front forks, check the frame rails, look inside the airbox, check past the air filter, check your antifreeze, start the bike up and ride it, and you'll have most of the answers you need. Buyer beware. Don't let anything scare you. You know, just use this as knowledge to buy the right bike. If you can buy a bike from an original owner that's got all the documentation and manuals and service records and it's in straight condition, I'd rather pay. I bought 4 CR500s from one guy, but I paid over $10,000 for each one of them, and they weren't perfect, but they were super clean and everything. It checked out. All the boxes were right. Original plastics, graphics, low hours, and I'd rather pay 10 grand for one that's mint than a turd for 4 and with a smashed frame, blown crank. You'll never, you know, once a cucumber becomes a pickle, once it's pickled, to get it back to cucumber state is hard to do. And you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still probably going to be a pig. Can you rebuild that pig? Yes, you can. But it's very expensive, and parts are expensive, and your time's valuable too. You'd be better off saving your pennies, buy a better bike. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. When you're checking out your chain and sprockets, guys, check your swing arm protector right here in chain guide. Make sure this thing's not rubbed off. I've seen 100 times rubbed all the way through and the chain's rubbing a hole in your swing arm. Make sure it's intact and that the screw's in on the bottom. Check your chain guide. Make sure it has a bottom slider on it, and that's in good condition. And check the general condition of your hardware. Is the axle look like it was tightened with a vice grip repeatedly and it's all screwed up? Is your adjustment hardware all played out? Can you buy new ones? Yeah, but once you get done making your list, you're not going to remember everything. Take a notepad and write everything down. If you want to buy that bike still, you can tell the owner, okay, I added it up. I need $1,400 worth of parts and it's going to take me 30 hours labor. You wanted $5 grand for the bike. Will 2,500 or 3,000 work for you? Because maybe he didn't know that the rear swing arm linkage or the front fork linkage was totally played, or that the spokes are frozen, or that the engine cases were formerly cracked, you know, or that sand went past his air filter. These are the facts you need to know to make an intelligent purchasing decision. You know, is the chain roller on the bottom and top intact in good condition? These are all key items to consider when you're looking to buy that vintage bike of your dreams, so your dream doesn't turn into a nightmare. Because your brakes work good doesn't mean they're worn out. If you get on the bike and it works good, take a look at your pads. You can see your pads right in behind here, and you can see, take a flashlight and look at the thickness of the pads. Are they super old and crusty and rusty, or are they bright brand new red ones? There's another $50 bill. Come back to your rear your bike and check your adjustment on your, see this one here? This is all the way out. So that means the new brake pads are in there. Does your rear brake work good? If you need new rear brake pads, there's another 40, 50 bucks in a couple hours of your time. Check your brakes, not just how they work, how much life is left to them, because just like your knobby tire, your brakes have a lifespan. Very common for these vintage bikes is the shock bumper. This shock appears to be in good shape. The shock shaft is in good condition, but it's missing the bumper on the bottom here because it decayed. It's 30 years old, all right? So somebody had previously rebuilt this and painted the shock, but there's no shock bumper. You can check the shock shaft. If it's covered in oil or if the chrome on that shaft is chipped or peeling, then you gotta send it out and have the shock rebuilt and chrome the shaft, or have it DLC coated gold or black, whatever floats your boat. A new shock, I just bought one for my CR500. It was $1,250 for an Owens. You can rebuild this shock right here, but a reputable shop's going to charge you, like Factory Connection, plan on $400 anyways, to completely rebuild it, re-chrome the shock shaft, and put a new spring on it. When you're buying a bike, if you're really going to ride this bike, this gets more into another subject, making sure the bike's set up right for you. check the rear sprocket gearing. They might have it. Find out what the stock gearing is, and take a look where it is. If stock gearing's 49 and they put a 54 or 53, the bike's only gonna do like 65 miles an hour. If you ride in the desert and a stock is a 49 tooth, you want to go down to a 48 or a 47. That stuff you can change. In the suspension, you can sit on the bike, check your free sag, pull it up right here and measure between this bolt right here and this bolt right here. That's your free sag, and you let it go and you measure it. Check the factory settings. Most bikes it's around 1 inch, and then have somebody check the sag while you're sitting on the bike. Usually it's you want about 4 to 4 1/4 inches for one of these bikes. So you sit on the bike and you measure those 2 points. If it only goes down 2 inches, when you hit a bump, you're gonna fly right off over the handlebars. It's not gonna be safe for you. So if you have a suspension that was set up for Joe Keller, 220-pound pro rider, and you're a 140-pound novice, you're gonna be totally effed. You're gonna be in bad shape. Make sure the suspension, if you're really gonna ride a bike, especially a 500, send it out to factory connection and have them valve it and spring it for your weight. If you're just riding around the green grass backyard or up and down your street, and it doesn't matter. If you're going on a motocross track with any bike, make sure the suspension is set up for your weight and riding style. You can adjust the suspension. These old bikes, these are cartridge forks. They're pretty good forks. There is a air valve right here. If the fork is soft, you can run 4, 8, 10, 12 pounds in there, whatever you want to do. But there are usually adjustments on the bottom for compression or rebound. All bikes are different. I think this one's compression on the bottom. And then you can adjust your shock, compression, and rebound. Almost all modern motocross bikes are adjustable. Get it set up for your weight, and you can see where it says soft compression. Right there, soft compression. It shows which way to turn it. You wanna set up the suspension. Make sure you got 12 to 14 pounds of air in the tire. You don't want to be running your dirt bike with 30 pounds of air in the tire because you're going to slide right off the track, okay? These should be around 12 pounds. Set your air pressure, set your chain sag, set your free height, adjust your bars so they're in a neutral position, right where you think you're comfortable. So I'm 6'2" and you're 5'6", you're going to want to set it up way different than me. That's a whole nother subject, bike setup. I'll get into that in another video. Thank you for watching, and hopefully this is helpful. Hope you all had a great 4th of July. If no one's told you yet, I love you all. God bless America.